Okay, so we're going to begin the Tuesday, May 1, 2018 Iowa City Council work session. First item on the agenda is to discuss the I-380 project input and next steps. So let me provide a little bit of background for council members and for the audience. As you council members know, this is a revised draft of a letter to the director of the Iowa DOT, Department of Transportation, about the proposed widening of I-380 from Forever Green Road north to Highway 30. Is that right? Thanks, Ken. I want to make sure that the final draft of the letter expresses the council's view and not mine. I worry a bit that I got ahead of the council on that, so I want to make sure that whatever's in the letter expresses our view, not mine. Therefore, I'm seeking your feedback about two key aspects of the draft letter. I think they're interrelated, but the two are, first, whether the letter accurately expresses our views both in tone and substance, and second, what we hope to accomplish by sending such a letter to the director. And in part, what I mean by that by the second point there is the letter will also be read by our fellow council people and mayors and so on in adjacent communities. And as we know from our joint entities meeting, we want to and from our strategic plan, we want to make sure that we strengthen our collaborative relationships with those entities. So, all right, with regard to the tone, when you read the draft letter, you may have noted that I posed some possibilities, but do you want the letter to indicate that we oppose the widening or have numerous objections to the widening or have several serious concerns about the widening or something else? So it's about tone. So if we say we have objections, then that's cut and dried and sends a strong signal to our neighboring communities. If it's one of the others, then it suggests that we're somehow open to some kind of discussion and some kind of negotiated modification of the draft letter. So I need your advice.
It would seem to me before we discuss tone and content that we need to decide what we hope to accomplish, because to me that can tend to direct the tone and content.
Fair enough. So let me get to that. I think that's reasonable. So with regard to the desired outcome, would you agree with the following statement, which appears at the start of the draft letter? I'm going to quote it. We strongly encourage you, the director, to facilitate and support careful analysis and evaluation of alternative land development / transportation scenarios for the corridor stretching from Cedar Rapids to Iowa City prior to making a final decision to widen I-380 or at least prior to undertaking any further major projects in the region. Yeah.
I think my answer to that question would be, I think, yes. I think that strikes the right objective, and I think that we should. I think when this first came up, I think the question is, as Dylan once said, it doesn't take a weatherman to know which way the wind is blowing. And I think people felt, is this going to be a waste of time? Are we just sort of tilting at windmills here? And I don't think so, because I think the issue here is that they solicited public comment. So I remember when I had brought this up originally, it was in response to the DOT's credit, soliciting public comment from members of the public. Presumably, the reason why they solicited that is because they're in good faith trying to then respond to that. So I think that your point is really good, Jim, is that before we consider this option, which presumably is because of increased population growth and a view that we need to encourage economic growth in the corridor, prior to considering that option, to consider the alternatives that conceivably are on the table first before we do that. So I think you get the tone right on that. Or the objective itself is right, and I think that the tone is good.
What do the rest of you think?
Yeah, I think the objective, as you laid out in that first paragraph, is appropriate at this time, and I think this is such a huge question, the transportation infrastructure, and I think we need to try to to express, for me, it's sort of following up on the objective, on the tone, that I would say serious concerns, to try to, we're entering into a conversation on a topic that, from what I can tell, has not really been discussed at any great length, at least in the way that I've viewed it. And so I think taking a more kind of open approach and saying we have concerns at this point is the right tone to tie to our objective.
Concerns, serious concerns? Does it matter to you?
Well, I think serious concerns. I mean, the cost issue, the climate change issue, the safety issue, all of these things are pretty serious stuff. So I would say serious is the right word.
I would agree.
I agree also.
I don't think we want to go so far as saying we oppose. I think that sets us at odds with other people who really are set and ready to see this go. Quite frankly, I think it's going to happen anyways, but
Seems that way.
I think at least if we start having this conversation now, maybe it will have an impact on it going to 8 lanes, and eventually. So, but I think doing the concerns or serious concerns, and I think the objective or the accomplishment, what we want to accomplish in terms of that sentence you read, I think works fine.
I agree, and I think the serious concerns does state what you want to say in that letter with the, as John alluded to, the cost, pretty high cost, the increased traffic, that you make more lanes, you're going to have more traffic, where we'd kind of like to try to back off from that, which then leads to the safety concerns with more traffic, more possibility of accidents. I think serious concerns speaks to it.
Let me ask a follow-up question with regard to the tone, not tone, to the substance of the letter, of the draft letter. So my question to you is, are you comfortable with the specific concerns outlined in the letter? And I want to indicate before you try to respond to that I went into a fair amount of detail here, mainly because the letter's going to the director of the Department of Transportation, and I thought we couldn't just say, we don't like it. We had to have some kind of rationale for having serious concerns. So, but the main question to you is, are you comfortable with the specific concerns outlined in the letter?
I have a few comments on some of the specifics. There's a fairly strong emphasis on the idea of a light rail system. And my feeling is that would be, in my view, part of a long-term vision. I'm not confident, even if we do reduce or try to control the capacity of I-380, that a light rail will be financially feasible. But I think it's something that can be put as a long-term goal that could eventually be implemented. But my view is that it's trying to optimize the use of the interstate as we have it, and also try to increase the productivity of the cities and towns that are served by it before we begin to think about how light rail might play into that scenario.
So perhaps I need to alter that particular part of it. Just to be clear, though, what I was trying to do was, first of all, say we think the DOT should support careful investigation of alternative scenarios that involve the interaction of land use and transportation. So I was just trying to lay out one possible scenario, and so maybe I put too much weight on that. I don't know. But
Jim, I know you weren't use the term quote-unquote light rail, and I know that for our MPJOC we've talked about Iowa City to North Liberty, and that's not light rail, but it is a commuter rail system that will be used. Were you referring to that when you? Because I think that's a term of art.
I was not, but that's a good point you're making. Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, the point is we have something for the audience out there in MPJOC. It's under evaluation. We're at a third stage study where we're at least assessing the feasibility of an Iowa City to North Liberty, I think, commuter rail with a fairly reasonable price tag. Nothing's been committed out there, but that's something we are evaluating. So before that, we look at the projected traffic count and benefit of that, we should look at first whether that will impair that particular scenario as far as that goes. So,
Yeah, so maybe I need to alter that to talk about commuter rail. And maybe Kent, maybe I could get your help, not right now, but in terms of providing a very, very brief description of what's currently being evaluated by the MPOJC so that I can insert a little bit of that language into this letter?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. There may be other ways of supplementing the argument as well by tying into the MPO long-range plan, which is, I think, 2017 to 2045. So thinking in that time frame in terms of what the points we want to try to make.
I was going to give it in my report later, but I attended the ECIO-CLG meeting last week, and they also are looking at alternatives as far as their corridor rides program and an express bus service. Of course, that's all the way up to Cedar Rapids, but that could be involved in that also.
Yeah, and that is part of the letter.
Right.
Part of the letter, one of the things the letter does is praise the DOT for supporting those initiatives. But they're short-term and maybe temporary and so on.
I guess, Jim, I really like the tone that you used. I think it is good, and I think in terms of the content is good as well, because I do not think it's intuitively obvious why we would support keeping it the way it is if we have concerns about traffic volume as well. I mean, there's this healthy debate within the traffic complaining community, including with Jeff Speck had talked about induced demand, that by adding this infrastructure, you're facilitating additional auto-centric infrastructure, auto-centric development, and you could be aggravating the problem rather than making it better. You could be aggravating the safety by encouraging speeding between Iowa City and Cedar Rapids. These are not things that are intuitively obvious just by thinking about them. Right. So I think that's good to point out. And then if you do have, I don't want to do a ton of research, but if there are some illustrative points for purposes of establishing a link between lanes and fatalities or lanes and traffic safety, that may be good to illustrate the point if you can find that data out there. But I know it's out there as far as that goes. But I think it's a good tone. And I would just, one final point, I have no problem saying that we oppose that. I don't think that that's that rude to say. I mean, we can consider concerns from other jurisdictions, but they're soliciting public input, which presumably means do you support or object? And in its current form, it seems like the consensus is we do object to it. It's not to say that we would never support it if these other things are addressed, but I think we should draw a little bit more of a line and say we oppose it.
So I would disagree and apologize. I was at a meeting up until 5 o'clock.
Thanks for coming.
And I did not speed to get here, but we'll move that on. Ultimately, I would say I wouldn't be more in line with serious concerns. I mean, if our focus or our intent is to put the DOT on offensive, then maybe, or are on the defensive, maybe then we would continue in this way. But if we're trying to focus on it from a persuasion standpoint / partnership standpoint, then I think that I would more be in line with the serious concerns. I also agree with Rockne as far as, well, it's not also, because I disagree with you on that point, but one of Rockne's points around data I think is important. And so there's a couple of areas focusing on traffic safety and other things that if you can help out in providing more information about what that looks like. I think it just gives it more meat and more juice as far as how that relates. And I do have we have to also have to remember this will be the director of the DOT. I mean, ultimately they do have some understanding of this information. So I don't want us to overlook the fact that they do have some of this data. And so if there's any data that we can provide that's maybe different or shows other jurisdictions or whatever the case may be when they consider this, I think that would be a little bit different than kind of how we're focusing on from that standpoint. the two issues I guess I have with the document in general is, if we're going to say we're looking at alternatives or supporting the DOJ or DOT, sorry, I'm working with the DOJ and some other stuff, the DOT with those alternatives, I think I want to know what those alternatives are and how are we doing those things and what are we doing in regards to what the city is focusing on, because this is kind of our first conversation on looking at transportation, discussing that. So if we're going to put it in the document, I want us to be clear, if they ask the question back to us, that we can clearly articulate what we're doing in that effort to, help with that partnership. The other piece of it is I actually disagree with the tone. Again, it goes back to, if you want people on defensive, exorbitant, questionable assumptions. I mean, if I was reading this document and I'm the director of the DOT, I would make the presumption that you are assuming that I don't necessarily have any type of understanding of this information, and I think that may be problematic if we're trying to look at it from the focus point of trying to persuade and trying to partner. But in general, with the content, I think I'm in line with many of the things with content. I'm not necessarily, I'm more on the fence, I think, than anybody else here about increasing lane traffic, because if ever on 380, it's slow. I don't think there's any speeding that happens, and there's some significant traffic that I know that, not only myself, but all the other motorists complain about on a regular basis, and I'm sure that's where the DOT is hearing some of those concerns. And so however we can figure out a compromise, and maybe it's like a chauffeur for me, and we can figure out that in the city budget. Now, we can talk about that later. But whatever we can figure out as far as a compromise to really focus on more of a partnership, I think that would just go better from that perspective from the DOT.
On that point, my thinking was, and I've talked with Jeff about this already, once we're satisfied with the tone and substance and, our overall purpose, in other words, once I revise the letter just a little bit, given the conversation, then Jeff would share that final revised draft of the letter with the other mayors, et cetera, in accord with the discussion we had at the joint entities meeting. And Jeff, I don't know, you and I talked about that a little bit, and I think you had an idea about how to proceed. And I don't know if you want to talk about that right now or not.
Well, sure. I think the question is, do you want to just send this letter off to the DOT director, and then you'll get some feedback from the other local governments that won't be positive. It's pretty clear the other local governments in the region support this widening project. And so that's really, do you want to take that extra step to say, here's a draft letter we'd like to send to the DOT, and we intend to send to the DOT, but before we do so, we'd like to hear your perspectives, and are you open to opposing viewpoints and perhaps shifting some language in your letter, or refocusing on different components based on input that you may receive from Coralville, North Liberty, Cedar Rapids, or anybody along that 380 corridor?
Yeah, my sense was that we did want to share the draft, I'm going to call it a final draft of the letter, and then meet with them so that they can, we can have a discussion about what's in the final draft letter. And then it's for us to decide what we want to do in response to that feedback from them. But, in the spirit of collaboration and so on within the region, I think it'd be good to do that.
I guess it depends on so are we collaborating or are we showing? I guess that's my question.
Well, we're expressing a view initially, are we?
And we are asking for that collaboration.
And then trying to be open to collaborating with the other entities. And I think during the joint entities meeting, I was hearing some significant support from various county supervisors, some interest on the part of some Coralville council members, and so on. I don't know where that'll go. I'm not trying to commit anybody to anything, but I think they would very much like to have the kind of working group discussion that I mentioned during the joint entities meeting. Yeah, so Jeff, my recollection is that your thinking a week or so ago was that you could specify a specific date, a bit of time in the future here, I don't know how far, and simply say we would invite you, these other folks, to come hear us present the essence of what's in this draft letter, and also share the final draft letter with them beforehand so that they come in informed, and then we can engage in a conversation about that.
Yeah, I think what was talked about at the joint meeting was that a mayor or an elected representative from each of the jurisdictions, and if they'd like to bring along a staff member, they could do that. But we'd set up a time, and then presumably the mayor or another spokesperson for the Iowa City Council would lead the discussion and kind of walk folks through the draft letter and some of the concerns and see where the conversation goes. Report back to the council, then you can determine whether you want to make any edits before you send it to the director.
I think that's the crux of my question. If we're going to, that's not collaboration, because that's saying that ultimately when people come to us and give us feedback, we're going to incorporate into the document. If we're not looking to do that, I would feel uncomfortable giving a document and saying, hey, we're going to potentially take your feedback and send it anyways. That's just weird for me.
Well, speaking for my own self here, I'd say that what I would hope to get out of such a conversation with other mayors, et cetera, would be information from them, insight from them, some expression of values from them that we could take into account in revising that letter before we send it to the director of the DOT.
Okay. I mean, I would just be clear about that expectation then.
Yeah, I mean,
That's all I would say.
I don't think you're not going to send the letter and have a conversation and all of a sudden find all the cities are going to be in lockstep with you opposing this project. I don't think that's realistic. They are going to continue to support it, but it may influence the language you use, may influence the points of focus. I think the other cities, I think where there is common ground on this is frankly the alternative transportation piece. There is a strong base of support to explore commuter rail, to explore how to really make the express bus and the van pools a success so that they sustain themselves well beyond this widening project. I think that's where you'll find common ground, but I don't think you're going to find common ground. I don't think you're going to convince them to oppose the project, at least the majority of them.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I know Ryan is here from the chamber. Where are you, Ryan? Oh, sorry, white shirt right in front of us. And, I've had several conversations with Ryan about something like this, though Ryan and the chamber had their own initiative underway, so there's certainly some degree of compatibility there. Okay, I think I've heard sufficient input from y'all to figure out what to do. So do I have your permission to work with Kent a little bit on this and revise the draft a little bit and share it with the mayors, et cetera? Okay, thank you. All right, we can turn to the next item, which is to discuss information packet item 6 from the March 1st packet regarding recommendations from Black parents on youth needs. So this, as you council folks know, relates to a memo that Pauline and I shared with you a little over 2 months ago concerning a meeting we held in this room with several Black parents concerning what we could possibly, when we invited them, we emphasized that we wanted to listen to them and learn from them. And more specifically, we wanted to hear their ideas about what Iowa City government could do to help our city's Black youth feel more a part of the Iowa City community and have good pathways to a good future here. So that's what we did in the meeting. We invited 20 specific people. 8 parents attended. My recollection is that all of the 8 were mothers, or females at least. I don't know if they're all mothers. Well, I guess they were since they were parents, right? And we shared information with you based on minutes that Ashley took of the meeting. There was a lot of conversation, and Ashley did a great job of summarizing that. But when Pauline and I looked at all that material and recalled the essence of the conversation we had with those Black parents, we thought that they were proposing at least 4 key actions that warrant our consideration. So what the memo does is identify those 4 key actions. And so we need to decide what we want to do. in response to that, and taking Jeff's advice in terms of what the staff can do and so on. So just for the audience's benefit here, I'm going to very briefly summarize these 4 key points. So in brief, the 4 key actions were: first, there's not much for kids to do here to stay out of trouble, regardless of color. The city could provide a place where black youth can go other than the Lee Recreation Center or Mercer Park. And then that structured activities would be available at this place. Secondly, the place and activities would have to be well managed, with on-site guidance and leadership being provided by African American Iowa Cityans. Third, the city could work with leaders in the black community and knowledgeable people at the university and Kirkwood to celebrate African American history better than doing the Black History Month and MLK Day. And fourth, the city could help small or new community organizations learn how to write grant applications more effectively and therefore be more likely to be able to obtain small grants. So the question is, what do we want to do in response to these suggestions? What do we feel we can do in response to them? And there are all these other details in the memo, and I haven't mentioned them all. I'm looking for your advice about these 4 things.
Well, I think one of the places I would start is in the notes that Ashley has with some of the more detail, and I think one is actually sitting down with the kids and asking what they feel they're missing or what they feel uncomfortable with. I don't agree, at least off the top of my head, that there's nothing for kids to do in this community. I think there's an awful lot of stuff for kids to do. Some of it's related to the schools, in terms of they offer a multitude of extracurricular activities. We've got things through UAY, we've got things through the rec center. Now, it's a matter, I agree, it's a matter of kids finding their place, and not every young person is comfortable in every single environment. But to suggest out of hand that there's nothing for kids to do, and I've talked to people in the African American community in this city who totally disagree with this statement. So I think it's, first of all, I'm concerned. I didn't know this was being done, first of all. I'm not sure, and I'm glad it was. I'm not disagreeing with that, but I didn't know this was happening. I think it takes a lot more than 8 people, or should take a lot more than 8 people, to direct what we're going to do moving forward as an institution as large as the city of Iowa City. And so I think a lot more research. One of the things we've talked about repeatedly, I know Kingsley and I keep bringing up, is the multitude of nonprofits, and even if they're not formal nonprofits, organizations within the community that are trying to do things. From the Dream Center, I'm not sure if that's a 501c3 or not, to lots of other organizations. So I think we need to start with a more concerted effort of getting information from a broader range of people, especially the kids themselves. And I think looking at what kind of age range we're really looking at, because you talk about kids in elementary school, that's a totally different kind of activity and structure that you need versus kids in junior high versus kids in high school. So first of all, I think there's lots to do, but we need to figure out why certain students either don't want to do those activities, aren't comfortable with those, and what ideas they have for things that they would like to do and would like to have available.
I appreciate your comment that there are a lot of extracurricular activities, but I think, I'm not certain if it's in those notes, but what came out of that meeting and what I heard at the forums, which is, by the way, how this meeting was spawned from what we'd heard at the forums, that the city's not doing enough to help the black community. But what came out of it was that transportation is the issue. Yes, sure, there might be a lot of after-school activities, but a lot of these kids are from families, their parents are working, they can't afford a taxi cab, although some of the schools, there is a taxi cab voucher program, but not a lot of them know how to apply for that, so perhaps we could reach out to the community and give them a better understanding of the options that are available for transportation for these kids so that they can attend these activities.
I would agree with that, Pauline. But again, that comes right back to the very first point of starting some new organization and providing some place for kids. To me, that's not where we should start. If there's kids and students in this community who want to be involved in the extracurricular activities in the schools, but can't do it because of transportation, then let's start with that and start talking with the school district about how we can partner with them. That, I think, would be, one, much more effective in terms of cost, and two, there are all kinds of studies that show that students who are involved in extracurricular activities at their schools are much more likely to stay in school and to graduate. So rather than starting new activities totally unattached from the schools themselves, if one of the big issues is transportation for activities at the school, let's start there. That doesn't mean there aren't activities. It's a hindrance. I don't disagree, but let's start there. Let's find out what the real problems are.
So, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, first and foremost, I think I appreciate the focus. I mean, I think that as we talk about, having a strategic plan that's focused on social justice and racial equity, I think it's incumbent on us to focus on communities that are crying out and saying they want something different. So I appreciate that focus. I would say, just based on this information that is provided, I think we need some more. I think it's a great start to start kind of hearing concerns, as we've done in multiple other, phases or iterations of different projects and other things. I mean, somebody brings a concern, we want to, analyze whether or not this is an inherent concern or a concern across all the community or whatever the case may be. And so for me, I think we need more information. And so if this is, and going back to staff, if this is sending the information out to different community organizations, getting more of a survey as far as, what our communities of color are doing, what are some of the issues, maybe focusing on the youth aspect of that as well. I think there's multiple indicators, as Susan mentioned, not only necessarily focusing on parents, but also what the youth are saying. I would also be interested, and this is somewhat of the conversation that we're going to hear, not necessarily later on, because I think we had a cap of 30,000 or 20,000. We were talking about what are our organizations that we're giving a substantial amount of money doing?
Oh, 20,000.
20,000. So what are our organizations that we're giving over $20,000 doing to effectively address programming with our communities of color? So that's another reason why I think this is still ruminating in my mind along those lines. But I think we need more information. And so I think to me, that's the clear next step. And I think these parents have brought up community concerns that have been talked about, not only obviously in the forums, but for a while. So I'm glad we're focusing on these things, but I think that we need to do a little bit more. And maybe this is a framework for how we go out. And so using some of this information as far as a space. And so if you're, sorry, now I'm trying to pull it up and I moved my finger. So a space, what does collaboration look like with the University of Kirkwood, with the city? How do we effectively, I do want to make sure that as we're thinking about doing some type of programming or talking about this, how do we make sure that we're empowering communities and not necessarily de-empowering communities by saying, well, here's this program, do this thing right here. Maybe going back to Susan's point, maybe we need to evaluate the program and whether or not that's a program that communities of color feel comfortable in doing and having that type of support. I think there's just a lot of questions I have in general around this, and so for me, it's a great start, and I love that we're having this conversation. This is probably one of my top 5 council meetings. The other one I think is when you started, getting up and showing a whole bunch of stuff from your trip in Egypt. But I think, Baghdad. But I think this is a great place to start as far as having the conversation what this looks like. And so for me, it would be we need to gather more data. That's my ultimate next step.
You brought up a good point, because one of the points that the women who were at the meeting brought up was that these grants that have been handed out to these organizations, who follows up on what do they actually do for the community, and especially for the children of need. So that's what spawned also perhaps, and this might be something I think we could start with. It wouldn't cost a lot of money. They'd asked about a class or something to learn how to do grant applications, because from what I've heard, some of these groups that get the grants, and we just went through that with the SDRE grants and the CBD grants, they have people who know how to write a grant application, and so it looks very beautiful. But some of these folks that have a good project but don't know how to sell it, we could help them by doing that, helping them learn how to write a good grant request. Sorry.
Yeah, I think really this is a good start. And by hearing the people at Martin Luther King Day, and again, you follow up and coming and do this is really great. But I also agree with Susan that it takes more than 8 parents to know what's going on. But at the same time, I understand that there is many activity in this city for children. But all of them are expensive. Even if we talk about the rec center. The rec center provides some, reduced fee or maybe free for children, but not all the time, and limited number of children. They cannot cover, or they don't have the enough money to cover all the communities. And the thing that caught my attention is Black parent. I guess this community, the minority, is not only Black. There is Latinas, there is immigrants from different countries. Have we reached out to those people? We need to reach out to everyone and hear there is what their idea is, what's their input about this. And as I told you, there is many activities. I remember in the Sudanese community, we just want to keep the kids busy during summer, and I know that Sudanese community kids of the Sudanese community like soccer, and we try to create a soccer team. We have our own coach, but we cannot find space during winter and again on the summer. And when we come to the rec center, we paying, I guess, $70 an hour or $35, I don't remember, but we were paying money, and we asked the parent to give us $20 so we can do that. If we can provide some space in the city for those people to come and do their activity, that's why reach out to them, see what they need, what they are missing. And also grant, that's a good point, because I know many associations, like the Sudanese Community Association, Latino Community Association, they do have association, but they don't know how to find money or write grant. That's also a good idea. I guess as Kinsey said, this is really good structure. We need to expand it and reach out to everyone in the community regardless.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was this listening post was a really good start, and in looking through the comments, where I ended up on this was the sense that, based on my experience, that we needed a needs assessment. We needed to better understand what the needs are. We mentioned the idea of, the needs may vary depending on age, depending on location. There's a lot of detail that goes into trying to understand what those needs are. And then I would follow that with an assessment of our facilities and programming, see what's missing, what are the barriers to those things.
Do you mean just city programming?
Well,
Or you mean
in terms of the
not-for-profit
process, I was seeing this as potentially a partnership between the city, the school district, the nonprofits, neighborhood organizations, as wide array as basically people who are interested in this and have a stake in addressing the challenges that we're facing.
I guess you brought up really good point by school district, because they do have space, on the schools they have for basketball and for soccer, for everything. If we can also bring them to the table and have their input in this if they want to do it. Yeah.
One of the things we heard from these specific parents was that their kids, for almost all the activities that are currently provided, the kids' activities are very sort of regulated. And the times are controlled, the activities are controlled, the kids are controlled. And instead of having a place where the kids could go under supervision and just be themselves and learn some stuff, do some stuff that's fun. I can't fill in the details because I don't have the details, but that's definitely part of what we heard from these particular parents. And I think Susan's clearly right that 8's an insufficient number upon which to base decisions about programs and all that. But these particular parents were very clear about their sense that their kids and the kids they know don't have a place to go where they can be themselves under supervision. And from their point of view, it would be very helpful for those kids to be supervised by African Americans who would act as role models and mentors. So, I mean, they were, those 8 parents were very clear about that. But you're right about 8 being way too small.
And that's a good point, Jim, because what did come out along those lines were that they've heard from children that they're just standing on their street corner, and people are concerned or get worried because there's this group of kids congregating on the street corner. And so that's what came out of that it would be great to have a place for them to go to congregate, to talk, or help with their homework or those kinds of things, not necessarily extracurricular sports, the basketball and the soccer, which is a good thing, but other kinds of social kinds of skills also.
And Jim, I want to key in on that last point because I did state it, but just to reiterate, I really appreciate the piece around ensuring that there's representation from the African American community, because I think too many times, and I'm going to make some people upset by the statement, everybody's well-meaning and wanting to do something, and I think that's why we have so many nonprofits. And so the question is whether we're actually doing the something that the other people or person wants. There's a lot of people can tell me what to do, but can I have an active role in actually putting together what that looks like for me? And so as we deliberate, if we can, and that goes back to that, socioeconomic racial equity toolkit, that goes back to, having those equity trainings and everything else. If we can keep that at the forefront of our conversations, I think we hopefully will end up in a good place, a better place than where we have before. Not us, but where things have happened before.
One of the things I'm wondering is do we want to, back to this question of, I think first to Susan's point, that was one thing I did want to focus on was we do have a lot of existing programs. So what part of those existing programs are we not adequately conveying in terms of what's out there, and what are the possible barriers of the programs? That's sort of the first point. But to Kingsley's point, I guess I would be open, if it's feasible, to solicit a specific proposal on a pilot project basis for us to work with our staff, so that we're actually affirmatively requesting, okay, we've heard your concerns, you have a proposal with more particulars, and then let's work with you within limit to try to make it happen. And it may not be feasible, but I think that's just something to think about as far as that goes. And the final, I guess more of a question, Kingsley, you were on the Ad Hoc Diversity Committee, so you would have more knowledge than I would on that. I think Jeff has some longitudinal assessment of that as well. For those set of recommendations that were made, did that include a youth component to it? My recollection is that it did not, because I also wanted to make sure that we weren't starting something brand new and ignoring maybe an existing framework that we already have. But if it doesn't, maybe we do need to update that to say, hey, look, what are the blind spots we have as a community that we're not addressing?
I think, Rockney, to that point, Jeff, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, that was a clearly focused and targeted conversation, and I don't mean that in the bad way. I just mean from the standpoint of the charge was pretty specific in relation to
law enforcement.
Law enforcement and transportation.
There were some youth transportation issues, but not
It wasn't
extensive.
addressing this
not a
particular issue.
recreational focus.
Okay. And I guess the final comment would be is that, we do, I think staff does know the organizations that do have their ear to the ground and are really connected to the community, but also solicit proposals from them in terms of specific recommendations that they may have in terms of ways we can more effectively serve. Because I think, back to Susan's original point, I think with the recommendations we have, at least in my view, it's very hard to sort of say, okay, next step, we're going to do X, Y, or Z. I think we need to continue to have that conversation. I view this as the first step. I think we want to make sure that those steps aren't so long that it becomes a process without an end. But we need to have at least some more feedback in terms of a more particular proposal, both from the community as well as hopefully from some of the nonprofits that may be able to effectively work with them and partner on that. So that'd be my thought.
I
Jim-
guess
oh,
I
go
don't
ahead.
quite see us as being ready for proposal until we really know, until we really get more information. I really think we need more information before we can really, otherwise I think what can tend to happen is you get a small group of people who get very vocal and or get the right connections and or find somebody who can put together a good proposal for them, and they get something, but it may not be something that really serves the bigger need. And that's where I think we really need more information before we start entertaining any kinds of proposals.
If I could make a suggestion, we have a number of our rec staff here in the audience today listening to this conversation. They have quite a bit of experience in the recreation field and engaging different populations. Hopefully, over the past couple of years, you've seen some of the programming shifts that we've done, and some of them have been one-off programs and experiments here or there, but hopefully you've seen an effort to tailor more of our programming, to our minority community. I think based on just listening to this conversation, we can go back as a recreation staff and work through some of the process. I think we know where the council wants to go. You want us to evaluate the not just parks and recreation, but the community resources available for youth. We may not have all the answers, but I bet we could come up with a couple different options for process and maybe present those to you and get your feedback on that.
Sounds good.
Sounds great.
Well done, Jeff.
Thanks.
Yeah, that makes sense to me too, Jeff. It seemed to me, listening to everybody up here, that we clearly want to build on the information provided here, recognizing that it in itself is insufficient, but it's something can be built on.
Yeah, I think you've heard both spectrums in the conversation, from pilot project to really full-blown recreation master plan. Again, completely different ends of the spectrum, and we can kind of lay out the pros and cons of each approach, plus maybe some middle ground as well.
Yeah. One other thing I'd want to point out is that I have the names of the parents who were involved, and if they would be helpful. Actually, I think maybe you had a list too, yeah, and email addresses and all that kind of thing.
Send them a follow-up.
Yeah, I have already, a few months ago, told them that I had prepared a memo and that the memo was going to be presented to the council, which it was, in a packet, 8 weeks ago or 10 weeks ago or something.
Well, my question, so we'll send follow-up regarding our conversation right now as well?
That would be good.
Okay,
Like
that's what I'm
us to.
asking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else anybody wants to say about that topic? We didn't, well, there's
One last
something.
thing, Jim. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Were you going to say something about this last topic?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just going to have one other point, which we apparently none of us talked about. And it has to do with the third suggestion, which was that we could work with leaders, the city could work with leaders in the Black community and knowledgeable people at the university and Kirkwood to celebrate African American history better. And that would obviously require a lot of collaboration and everything. But I'll speak as a white guy, which is not hard to do for me. I routinely encounter new information, new DVDs, new documentaries, et cetera, that are really opening my mind a lot. And in my memo, I referred to Henry Louis Gates Jr.'s PBS series, Africa's Great Civilizations. There's all sorts of stuff that could be built on there that would be possibly interesting and helpful for our Black youth. It's for them to decide in the end, but yeah.
When staff does that, the other thing I'd be interested in is number 4 on the grant writing. I know there've been some classes before, and I don't know if the university has offered them or Kirkwood or the city has, but if you could maybe just find kind of what's been done before and maybe how we could build on that, because I do think offering some opportunities for people to learn about grant writing would be a good thing, regardless of the rest of this. But I know it's been done. I just don't know how frequently or who's been invited or anything.
Yeah. Agreed.
The other thing I would just mention is just that conversation around space, and again, not to belabor the point, but I think we have to, and we've talked about it, and Susan mentioned it as far as, looking at current programming and nonprofits and other things, but there's been a lot of conversation, at least that I've been a part of, around, are certain spaces welcoming? And we've talked about that, but I think that
was part of the
I think that needs to just make sure that's a part of the higher echelon standards as we kind of deliberate, because I think that's a consistent concern that I hear on a regular basis. And I just had the conversation with the downtown district as far as that as well, asking, how can we be more inclusive, or how can we be more welcoming? Because as we know, there are, historical implications with this conversation, but ultimately there's also history within Iowa City that has led, certain communities not to feel comfortable in certain areas, even in our own town. And so I just want to make sure that isn't lost in this space conversation.
I guess also reaching out to communities to know their interest. I know that maybe even at the rec center, like by the people come from different community, they know what they like to do. Maybe they can just also have like some comment on that, on the recommendation. Yeah.
That word collaboration keeps coming up. We were talking about it with the 380, and I think, again, now that's important. I think even with the a lot of topics that come up that we need to work a little closer. We're getting better at working with the Iowa City Community School District, because that had come up, that they need to teach more of the Black history in the schools besides just on Martin Luther King Day. And I think they're getting a lot better on that. But also as far as the training for jobs, for future jobs, for them to have a place in the community, the ones that aren't going to go on to college. So those kinds of things, collaborating with the Sudanese group, and those kinds of neighborhood associations, working together with them on finding solutions to this.
Yeah. Okay, so Jeff, we hope to get some constructive feedback from the staff. Good deal. So let's turn to the next item, which is clarification of agenda items. Item 4D1, appointment of student liaisons.
Yep.
Gustav Stewart, welcome aboard officially in this role.
Are we?
Yep.
Isn't this a process? Do we have to vote on that?
We do.
Oh, okay. I just
It's
wanna-
that calendar.
Yes,
Yeah, I just want to.
We should make sure to give him nice chair,
Let's
comfy chair. Yeah, comfy chair.
I agree.
But also Austin Wu. Hi, Austin. Nice to see you again. Looking forward to working with you over the next year. Yeah.
I'm still not sure about Gustav, but we can move on.
We can talk about it.
Yeah.
All right. Other agenda items? Questions about them?
I just would like to see if you can look at the item number 4F8, a letter from Harry from state about blocking the curb cut.
You want staff to look into that?
Yeah.
You know what we're referring to,
Yeah.
right, Jeff? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, good. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, I have that too, and Harry was asking about raising the fee. So there was that. What I would add to it, at least in those areas where we do have lots of pedestrians, is considering marking the curb with red paint. Something I think there seems to be a lack of understanding. You would think this would not be as
It's difficult.
as difficult to understand as some people seem to have, but possibly thinking about some red curbs so people know where they can no longer park their vehicle. And so it's quite common for cars to stick out into the curb ramps.
I would suggest enforcement before paint and signage. You can see just the struggle that we have to keep up with our lane markings we're painting our lane markings every year because of the salt and the wear and tear that they get. I've been in communities, I've seen plenty of communities that start the painting and it looks great for a year or two, and you can't keep it up, and it looks pretty bad after a few years if you don't have the resources to continually put into that. But John, we talked about this earlier. We do not enforce distances to curbs very proactively, and it's certainly something I can discuss with the police department. I think on the topic of the fines for the curb cuts, what we would like to do, it's probably been a little while since we did a holistic review of those traffic fines that we have under local control. We'll probably just look at those holistically and come back to you with some recommendations, because there's probably a few that are a little too low.
What, also, Jeff, what about with our communications department? I mean, they're doing kind of like public service type things every once in a while, even doing something related to that.
Yeah, we've done some, I think in the winter, last couple of winters, we've done specific efforts targeting shoveling of curb cuts. I mean, it's just as easy to do something on driving etiquette and rules of the road when it comes.
Yeah, and related to that, because I had not a major incident, but could have been this weekend. And I think with more bikers out and pedestrians out, I swear drivers do not understand that they're supposed to, when there's a stop sign or a red light, they're supposed to stop at that solid white line. And instead they go like way up into the crosswalk. Good luck training them, but yeah, I had a car that didn't get that this weekend. And
I just want to ask you, is there a sign like for fine if you, I don't remember, is there a sign really over there for fine if you block the curb cut?
No, there's no signs.
that would take a lot of signs.
We have, yeah, be a lot of signage.
But, like, how do people know?
They get a ticket.
Just the ticket.
How
So
do they get the
When
ticket?
you take your driving test, I mean, that's part of studying to get your driver's license, is those different things. How far are you supposed to park from a fire hydrant?
I know, but it's not like
Personal
I guess for
responsibility.
me,
I'm sorry. Personal responsibility.
exactly, but you know.
But the communication's
Most
a
of the
good point,
time.
Muncie, here, though. Communication staff does a great job of communicating, but I'm saying that if that could be an additional point of emphasis, I think that's something where we could get that out, but I think that's a good point.
Jeff, let's talk about enforcement for Nissan later on. Thanks.
Okay.
On this lines, I'm thinking we've just spent so much money on improving our curb cuts and adding curb cuts that, we just can't have people just ignoring the rules and parking there. But as Susan said, they perhaps forget the things. They don't maintain safe distance. They park in fire hydrants. They park by stop signs. And unless there's enforcement, but our law enforcement are busy. They can't be just going out and watching for these kinds of violations.
And what do you think about increasing the fine?
That might help.
That's my work.
Because that would be another thing if it's repeated offenders.
Yeah,
that
because
are
my
doing this.
understanding is 25, right?
25, yeah.
15, is that right? 15.
I
Only
guess
15.
Jeff was
it's
And they're going to look
$15?
at that, so.
Oh, that's really low. Yeah, I just overstaying at 30-minute meter and I get $25 ticket. Yeah, I guess to block the curb, that's huge. It should be more than that. I really support increasing the crime. I don't know. We can talk about it more.
We'll come back to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good deal. Any other agenda items?
There was a long report from Project Green, which I found informative, and I hadn't realized that their work, the budget for their work over the 2017 was $38,000. So thank you to Project Green for that work, and also that they've been around for 50 years. And 50 trees will be celebrating those years planted at Ashton House, which I think is the nice thing I'm seeing at Ashton House is it's becoming, bit by bit, plant by plant, kind of a destination garden along the river, which I think is also a wonderful thing.
And I think they have their plant sale this weekend at Carver Hawkeye Arena, I believe, Saturday.
Yeah, the volunteers on Project Green deserve a lot of praise for all the energy they put into their volunteer work, so I'm sure we all recognize that. Any other agenda items?
Just wanted to mention 6A, the rezoning on Prairie du Chien Road. The applicant has requested deferral on that item.
So on that, Eleanor, you provide feedback about whether this is appropriate, but we have to open the public hearing. And even I'm thinking at the very start of the meeting, I will just indicate to people that item 6A is going to be deferred. But if anybody wants to stay around and speak at the public hearing, they can do that. So, all right, that's the way I'll proceed on that.
We're not planning to give a staff report on that project.
Understand. Okay, I wanted to ask a question about item 4E2, which is setting a May 15th public hearing and first consideration for rezoning 12 Court Street from RM44 to RFC SD. Eleanor, are we legally required to schedule a March 15 public hearing and first consideration because of the timing associated with?
May 15th.
Oh, I'm sorry, I meant May 15.
No, you can set that hearing at a later date.
I ask because my personal sense is that the information we currently have in the agenda packet I personally find insufficient to make a judicious decision about what to do with regard to rezoning. And I know we're going to get additional information over the next couple weeks, but I feel uncomfortable about even setting a public hearing when, in my judgment, the information we currently have is really quite vague about what the rezoning would enable.
I'm sorry, I was making a note. Which one were you looking at, Jim? I apologize.
It's 12 Court Street. The reason it's 4E2. It's just setting a public hearing and first consideration on that.
I don't know. I guess my thought is we do have 2 full weeks with, an agenda packet in another week, and we do get that our council packet 4 or 5 days before the meeting. 5 days. We get on Thursday. Our meeting's on Tuesday. I would rather set the public hearing the way it is, and then if we really feel like we haven't had time to consider all the information, then we could certainly continue the public hearing at that time.
I think there's some value to having the public hearings because that's where you can have that exchange. I mean, where you have that open public exchange about what information you think is lacking and what isn't, as opposed to, I don't know where that conversation occurs if you don't have the public hearing.
Yeah, I understand that. I think in part why I asked this question is because we don't yet have the Planning and Zoning Commission's minutes from its April 19th meeting when it discussed this particular proposed rezoning. I understand they voted unanimously to support it, but I don't know what their conversation entailed. So I don't know what issues came up for them. I know what issues have come up in my own mind, and I don't need to go into detail about them right now, but
Well, again, we may have those minutes before
Yes, sir, we'll
then.
get-
well, I assume we
We'll have
will.
those
Yeah.
minutes before the 15th.
Yeah.
Like Eleanor says, I think and I hadn't thought of it this way, I think lots of times, when we do have questions, the chance to have that back and forth with staff and the developer about what our questions are, what more information we need. If we don't have that chance to have the conversation, they may not know what we need, and delaying it might not still solve the problem.
So won't we have 2 more readings too? I mean-
That's how you convey
Yeah.
that's how you convey your thoughts as a council.
Right.
And that's really what needs to be conveyed, not one council member,
It does raise, and this isn't specific to that item, but it's a more general comment, and that is that the type of content that was in that, on that item, the level of information, I also felt was conceptual and diagrammatic. And I spoke with Jeff about this late last week. What I'm seeing is and perhaps this might be a work session topic. I'm not quite sure, but that back in my planning and zoning days, we would get a pretty detailed presentation at planning and zoning where the project was presented much more rigorously. It was not presented as a concept. It was presented as a project with elevations, a site plan, and so forth. And more recently, we've been seeing projects presented where they're presented with the underlying understanding that the drawings that are being presented may not be what the project will end up being. They're presented as conceptual. And it's very difficult for me to assess a project when what I'm evaluating is something that I don't really have confidence it's necessarily what's going to be the project at the end point. So, I think, there seems to have been a change in the way projects are presented. I would be interested in talking about it as a work session. I understand the other side of the issue that, there are concerns on, say, the side of the developer that, they don't want to get too deeply into a project, into too much detail before they get an understanding of what the position of the council and planning and zoning will be. I think there may be ways of addressing that. But for now, I am feeling, and, I think the one on Court Street is a good example. It's kind of a sketchy presentation as a starting point. Yeah.
I think it will be very helpful when we do see the minutes from the P&Z, because as John mentioned, it's come up in their minutes before. Several other projects they have requested deferral because they didn't feel they had adequate information, that it was more of a concept, they couldn't really grasp what the design and what the effect on the community was going to be. So I'm surprised. They must have gotten what they wanted, that they had the vote of 7-0.
I guess so we'll find out when we see those minutes.
Right.
Okay, well, my sense is that the council would prefer to go ahead and set the May 15th public hearing, so we should do that. And John, I think with regard to your work session idea, my own inclination is to just have conversations with Jeff in 2-on-1s and that kind of thing about that topic initially, see how that goes, and then maybe if we feel we need to, we could have a work session. All right. Any other agenda items? Questions about agenda items? I'm going to assume the answer is no. So let's turn to the info packets. April 19.
I want to talk about IB4.
Which one is that, Maz?
Is the opportunity zone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just like for the public benefit and my benefit, I just want to ask Jeff, or one of the staff, to talk about it and explain what it is and what the impact in Iowa City.
Sure. The Opportunity Zones program was established in last year's federal tax legislation. It created a tax break for unrealized capital gains. So if somebody has some funds invested in something that they haven't sold yet, that when they sell it, they'll have to pay taxes on that. It allows them to get a tax break on that if they invested in certain low-income census tracts that are designated by the governor. So the governor of Iowa had the ability to designate, I think it was 62 across the state, and we applied for 4. We could apply for up to 4, and 2 of those were awarded. So they're still working out the rules at the federal level. The Department of Treasury is establishing how the program will work specifically, but basically the longer an investor leaves that money in this low-income census tract that was designated, the greater the tax break is on taxes that they would have otherwise had to pay. So the census tracts that were designated in Iowa City, one is, and this one was our top priority, encompasses the Procter & Gamble site, which we thought was very attractive, all the layoffs that we expect to be coming there, and the industrial area around Procter & Gamble, which includes a lot of their supply chain companies and logistics companies that will probably be impacted by Procter & Gamble shifting some of their operations. That one goes all all the way to the river. So it includes Iowa City Marketplace, which we've invested quite a bit of local funds in recent years. It includes the lower half of riverfront crossings. And so that one we thought within the city was by far the most attractive for reinvestment. The second tract that was designated by the governor is just to the north of that. It encompasses Town and Campus, or Town Crest, so east of First Avenue and all the way to Scott Boulevard. So it includes a lot of residential area there as well, and some of the commercial district to the east of First Avenue. So those are the two that we got designated. We're not certain exactly how the program will work. That we expect to come from the federal government within the next couple of months. But we were very pleased that we had two designated. We probably would have been happy with one. So we were pleased that the governor chose two of ours.
And just to clarify, this is a federal tax incentive program, so this isn't offering local incentives at all. Now, we could choose to commit local incentives in a project where someone is also using the opportunity zones, but the opportunity zones provide federal tax breaks. So there's been a little miscommunication on that locally as people are learning about that. We're not committing to just to anything with the opportunity zones. We're just creating that opportunity by nominating these census tracts.
Good, thanks.
I would just mention IP5.
Could hold on just 1 second. With regard to the opportunity zones, we got this letter from Director Durham, Debbie Durham, about notifying us that two of our zones have been nominated. Have you already responded to her? Thanks for the letter kind of response, or do you think that's appropriate?
We didn't formally do that, but we certainly could.
I'd be happy to sign a letter of that type.
Okay, it's probably a good idea.
Yeah.
Oh, that's okay. I was just going to say IP5, Moody's gave Iowa City a AAA bond rating again. What's this, 38-something years? I'm not sure exactly how many, but it's a long time. And it's a long document. And I'm sure not one that most people want to read through in detail, but I think if you take the first 10 or 15 pages of it before you get into all the actual financial details, there's a lot of really good information in there, even if you start with the very first page of it. Factors that could lead to a downgrade, weakening of our tax base or resident income, material reductions of operating reserves or available liquidity, and that's one thing staff has done a really good job of building up our reserves. Growth in the city's debt or pension burden. So as we've reduced our debt, that certainly makes us more attractive for AAA bond rating. And also keep in mind that we're one of like 50 cities in the state of Iowa for whom our fire and police are under a different pension system. They're not under IPERS. They're under a much more expensive and a much higher benefit type program, but it is very expensive for us. And so I think if you just, like I say, if you flip through the first, that was one of the things, and I went through and highlighted a few others, but there's a lot of really good information. Staff certainly did a lot of information. There's a lot of good facts in here when you scroll down to about the 7th, 8th, 10th page, information on our tax rates, information on the amount of taxable property broken down by different type. So if you don't want to read, just kind of scroll till you kind of see the tables. And there's a lot of really good, quick read information that I think is very beneficial. But kudos again to staff, Dennis and all of his staff who do so much work in getting these bonds together. I know legal does as well as our legal bond counsel, but really appreciate it.
Along those lines, I think one of the things that I think we all need to do a better job of is this question of our recent property tax reductions in our debt levy. I don't think that that's really commonly understood that that's actually what we're doing. We've received a lot of feedback. How can you be reducing taxes, or we have all these other needs that we need to fund, which is a legitimate concern, but serve additional funding priorities in our operating budget. So that's just more of a comment than anything else. And then the other thing that I just wanted to bring up is IP2 staff's very thoughtful memo on participatory budgeting. That's something I know that we've really tried to get out there, and I think that staff really struck a nice balance between, trying to move that process forward while at the same time being mindful of the amount of resources it would take to do a full-out participatory budgeting process. I would like at some point in the future for us to consider more of those full-out processes like we saw, for example, with Evanston and Des Moines seem to be more sort of throughout the community. Sometime in the future, I think we can do that. I think with all of our, especially with our all of our uncertainty with our executive staffing, we're not really there yet. So I guess my point is I'm glad I'd like to follow those recommendations that the staff had made the recommendation. As far as that goes, with one change, one really good thing that Kingsley had done this year is the suggestion at the beginning of our budgeting process to invite the public. Whether we could do something at the beginning of our budgeting process that we did or review in January, if we could do something along those lines 6 months out, because I remember last year staff consulted with us during one of our work sessions to say, hey, where would you sort of like to see us go? We gave sort of some general parameters in terms of where we'd like to see them go, and then they went into their own detailed budget process in the fall. I would like to see us do that with a little bit extra in terms of inviting the community feedback for what their general concerns are, and then to be able to move those into a budgeting process. So hopefully, I know with Kingsley's suggestion, it didn't seem to be a ton of extra work to add I don't know if I'm not necessarily in a breakfast or anything like that, but something along those lines I think we should at least explore 6 months out.
I'm for it. Do a dinner.
Yeah.
Your foot in the bill?
Something along those lines.
On you, Jeff.
One comment I would make on that item is, and I agree with Rockne, I think, and I sense that everyone felt satisfied with staff's recommendations on that, but something I still remain interested in is the idea, say with the budget, that we structure it in a manner where there might be 2 or 3 meetings out in the community. We have 3 district representatives. That could be one framework for it. And structure the budget with a little bit more focus on the geography that is generated by our districts. This notion that depending on where we live in Iowa City, our experiences vary. Our understanding of the budget and our understanding of Iowa City will vary depending on where we live here. So there's that. But the other value of that in my mind is it's an opportunity for members of the community to get to know one another based on their geography, which I think can be a useful connection. So it's not simply how we convey the information from the city to the community and that back and forth, but also the back and forth and sense of connectivity that can be generated within the community itself. So those networks, it's an opportunity, an episode like our Party in the Parks, where community can meet one another and form their own relationships and associations to better the community.
Sounds like an interesting idea to me, but I'd like to know what Jeff and staff think is really viable, what's possible, and it'd be, I don't know if you have to answer that right now, but how much time's involved in putting together a district-based summary of the budget, of a forthcoming budget, and then going out into the community in 3 different locations. I think that part's not so hard, going out to the 3 different locations, but assembling information.
The districts are rather
basis.
large. If you're looking for, geographies to come together and really bond, I don't know that districts are the right thing, because the districts well. There's lots of neighborhoods within each of those districts. I think it'd be hard to accomplish that goal with just 3 sites. I think Simon did a nice job in the memo of really emphasizing what we feel is the best way to get input, and it's a little indirect, but it's through all these master plans. We've been spending a ton of organizational energy the last 4 or 5 years on master plans. We're out on the bike plan, the climate plan, the downtown plan, and park plan, and on and on. And we get a ton of feedback that craft those plans, and then we plug those into the budget the best that we can with the resources that we have. I still feel like that's the most effective way to incorporate people's feedback into the budget. When I talk to peers who do the kind of the Des Moines model that you saw a couple years ago, where they go out into the community during budget time and they say, what are your priorities? It's really easy, or it's common, I should say, for special interests to really latch onto those processes. And so you're going to get a group that really wants to advocate for item A, and they're going to mobilize and they're going to flood those meetings and they're going to tell you that's the most important thing. And then it's hard to say no to that, even if you don't think that that's the top priority with everything else that you've got. So you just need to be mindful that that could happen. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it because of that, but when you go through the master plan process and you don't have the budget process kind of framing it, I think you get more genuine feedback. You get overall a better plan that informs the budget. We can do, the breakfast on a budget. That worked really well. It worked a lot better than I thought it would. I give Kingsley some credit for that, and that was really thrown together in a matter of a couple of days, it felt like.
Kingsley?
Kingsley does some things.
So we can do some of those things. We usually, last couple of years, we've spent a work session in August talking to the council about broad priorities. Yeah, we could probably do something to open that work session up a little bit and have something similar, like at the breakfast on a budget. If that's what you'd like. I'd start with that before you get into a deep community engagement process, though.
Yeah, it was something along those lines. It's a relatively light framework. It's not overly staff intensive, and I think, it did have a big impact. So at least I'd like to see that.
So otherwise, you're just going to proceed with the relatively minor steps that are laid out in the memo, right?
Yeah. And hopefully so tonight we're on Facebook Live for the first time. Our work session's streaming on Facebook.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I take back everything I've said.
Right. Now it was already streamed through cable, but hopefully you see that we're trying to, because that's the priorities that you've set for us, we're trying to open up the access to government, so even people watching this meeting can send us feedback, perhaps, because they caught it on Facebook where they otherwise wouldn't have. Hopefully all that feedback, eventually makes its way to budget priorities, whether you're getting that feedback or staff's getting that feedback. And we're going to continue to try to do those things.
All right. I want to mention IP number 9, which is minutes of the Historic Preservation Commission's March 8 meeting.
IP 10.
Is it 10?
Yes.
All right. Heavens, I made a mistake. Minutes of the meeting. So just reading the minutes reminds me that I wonder if we routinely issue certificates of appreciation for all departing board or commission members who have served for one or more full terms. I wonder if we do that. And if we don't, I think it'd be a good idea.
I don't know, Kelly, do you know?
I think it's based on each commission and what they do. I'd have to ask staff.
Well, when I imagine serving on, say, the Planning and Zoning Commission for 10 years or whatever, some long period of time, I think such a person deserves acknowledgement. And somebody who's been on the Human Rights Commission for 3 or 6 years, likewise. So I would encourage us to do that.
IP7, the CPRB, the forum, I was going to mention that in the activities that I've done, but since it's on the agenda here, I know Susan was there. I'm not sure who else was there, but it was a very good forum. I thought not really well attended, but as usual, Chief Matherly did a wonderful job. He's a very good public speaker and able to take questions from the audience and answer them appropriately, and so I thought it was a very good event.
Okay, let's see if we can fire through the rest of this. So our next info packet is April 26. IP number 6 is a memo concerning the city's open internet pledge. And Staff provided a very reasonable response. I don't feel any strong compulsion to sign the pledge, given the fact that it doesn't really add up to anything really meaningful.
Yeah, and I think given staff's analysis of it, I think it gives people a false sense of what we're doing, given that we don't have control over so many of those things. So I would be inclined not to. Not that we don't support it, but
Yeah, I don't know. I guess any one of us could put on Facebook or tweet or whatever that we support an open internet, but I don't see a good reason to sign the pledge.
Where are we in terms of time frame, though? We were going to do a joint meeting with the Telecommunications Commission on the question of broadband, where we're at in the community. Or that's still on the agenda, isn't it? I mean, I think it does.
It's on the work session agenda.
Okay.
And I think we finally have a full commission.
Maybe we could address some of these issues there, too.
Yeah. IP number 8, KXIC radio interviews. So I know some dates that I cannot do stuff. I'd like to volunteer for May 23.
Kingsley, May
Things
16.
going.
Do May 9th.
is the 16th already taken? Did you do that, Kingsley?
Kingsley's the
Kingsley took
16th.
the 16th. I'll take the 30th.
Which day?
16.
I'll take July 11th.
I'll take July 18th.
I will go with Kingsley on the 16th.
You'll double up with him?
Yes.
June
What-
6th.
Is that still open?
I think it's still open, isn't it? I'll do June 6th, and that'll be it for me.
Okay, Rockne, June 6th. How full are we now?
We've got June 13, June 20, June 27th, and July 25th and August 1st.
So I've got quite a few.
Well, I've got 2 in. Rockne, you've got 2 in, right?
Is July 4th taken?
You say again?
It says it's a holiday, so.
Oh, we're not doing
yeah,
anything.
Apparently
What do you
not
have
doing
in
it.
August?
August 1st.
August 1st.
August 1st, that's the day I will come. I will be in no, I cannot
Are
do
you
it.
back?
No.
Okay.
I'll be in the airplane.
Kelly, could you briefly go through the list and say who has what?
Sure. May 9th is Rockne, May 16th is Kingsley and Mazza, May 23rd is the mayor, May 30th is Susan, June 6th is Rockne, July 11th is Susan, July 18th is Pauline.
July 11 is Pauline.
July 11th is Susan.
Oh, Susan.
18th is Pauline.
John, you don't have any yet?
Yeah, Susan took mine, so.
Oh, I'm sorry. If you want those, I can switch. I'm pretty flexible.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty flexible.
Well-
I was just throwing out dates.
Okay. Yeah, if I could have the 30th of May and July 11th, those were the 2 days.
Okay.
I actually had them in there.
Okay.
Both
Okay.
those, John?
Give John my 2. Then I will take June 6th is still open?
No, Rockne.
Rockne.
Okay, June 13th. And what else is still open? I'm sorry.
June 20, June 27,
August 1st.
July 25th, and August 1st.
I'll take August 1st. And I'm sorry, what did I just take? June 13th?
June 13th, correct.
Couldn't have hit you better.
You-
I can do June
I'm
20th.
away most of for a good part.
So what are you still missing, Kelly?
June 27th and July 25th. And we,
Staff could take those.
Oh, I could do
For both.
one of
Okay.
those. Let's see.
I'll run those.
I don't know. I think I could do June 27.
okay?
You said July 25th.
We'll take July 25th then.
Staff.
Moving on. IP10, the climate action, community partnerships. it's a nice array of small grant initiatives. So thanks for putting the summary together, Ashley. Some of them are quite intriguing, all potentially fruitful. Anything else, folks, on that IP information packet?
Yeah, just IP9. Kudos to Stephanie and Jody for the work that they're doing across the community. I mean, I know it's kind of getting routine now, but there are some different things that we are doing that are really, really exciting. I mean, going back to Eleanor and the change with the gender identity for our forms, for committees, I mean, that's a big deal. And so just want to make sure that, I know everybody's reading it, but just those highlights. The only question I had is, has that gone out to through our communication?
I'm not certain. We can make sure and
Okay,
get that out.
just double check, because I didn't get a chance to tweet it out. That's what I wanted to do.
So on that point, Kingsley, I think one of the things we should feel very good about is what we've done with regard to racial equity and with regard to various social justice initiatives. I think these are major steps. I'm very proud of them. But they're hard to communicate simply, other than just sort of say, hey, we've done a lot more, because it's not enough. But there are all these detailed things, coffee with a cop, and all the details that are taking place. So how to communicate that kind of those activities in a way that the public really gets, I think that's a
The public
challenge.
gets action and they get effort, and that's, and not to say we shouldn't try harder to communicate, but they want to see us working hard, and they want to see us engaging and out there, and that's what we're focused on right now. It's hard. I mean, these reports, we talk about this all the time internally, to boil this down into a couple of bullets or a couple of nice communication materials. It's hard.
It is,
and it probably undersells what we're doing.
Well, I think the other thing, too, is I think people also don't want us to be patting ourselves on the back too much either, to like putting the foot off the gas. So it's a balance. But we have great communication staff, and I bet they can strike the right balance.
Jim, to that point, I would say, the only way that I could see of doing a better job of communicating doesn't really focus on staff, is more focused on us. And so when we're going out in the community talking about different issues, how are we tying it back to social justice or racial equity? How are we talking about it in different ways to make sure the community is aware, but also if they have different concerns? Obviously, we just talked about in depth about some concerns some of our community members had. And so I think that's really the time. I would agree with Jeff. I mean, the action speaks louder than words. Having this compiled, though, I think is important just in general for my own knowledge. When somebody asks me a specific question, well, what is Iowa City doing in regards to trainings for cultural competency with the officers? I go scroll to this document to be able to provide that information, because I do think it's important for our community to know that we're doing that work. But I would agree. I mean, I think it's doing the work and then just having a place to pull that information. But I think it's incumbent on us to say, I would say almost every single time, saying that, this is what we believe in. And I don't necessarily know it focuses on just this strategic planning priority. I think it's all of our strategic planning priorities around climate change, around fiscal responsibility, and having a strong foundation. I mean, all those different things I think we need to do a better job of campaigning and talking about.
Agreed. Any other IP items? All right, maybe we can do the council updates on assigned boards, commissions, committees, et cetera. So let's start with Susan and move to the left.
The steering committee for the Access Center continues to meet typically every couple of weeks. Jessica Peckover had her last meeting last Tuesday, so she is now gone down to San Antonio. We'll miss her. Our new project manager will be on board very shortly. One of the biggest things that people are working on right now with that is trying to understand how what we are trying to do here in Johnson County fits in with state legislation and the writing of the rules for the state-designated access centers, because there's definitely some conflicts in terms of what we were planning to do and what they and their goals in terms of the legislation. So it's trying to figure out how we're going to fit in there, and if we're not going to fit in there and not be a, quote, access center as defined by the state, do we still, will the centers and the people there still qualify for Medicaid and other funding streams? So a lot of research, a lot of talk, a lot of issues going on. I think that's the only, haven't had a JEC meeting lately, so that's it.
John?
I don't have anything to report on commissions and committees, but I did want to mention meeting, Sally Scott was in town, and she was down at Big Grove, and so I went down to say hello, and there were some folks there whose names I'm blocking on at the moment, but, you know, Tracy and who's with
Tracy Ockenbach.
Tracy Ockenbach and Marion Dennis. Marion Dennis. And, you know, this was 2 days after our last council meeting, which had been kind of an interesting meeting with regard to the affordable housing question. And it was just nice talking with them. They were very affirmative on what we're doing. They understand, you know, it's kind of like the social justice question. Nothing we do is ever going to be enough. We have to continually work and try to expand our reach on that. But, you know, Marianne was saying how within the state of Iowa, we are quite a ways ahead of any other city in terms of our affordable housing actions. So it was just nice to hear that after last Tuesday. And then the following day, we had a tour, Kingsley and I, of the wastewater treatment plant. Ashley and Tim led us on that. It's certainly worth seeing. And one question that certainly came to my mind was the energy consumption associated with that facility. It is, I think, our largest consumer of energy. So,
Would you say the highest?
Highest, yeah.
if it's something we can do to try to reduce that consumption, that would certainly be, you know, a worthwhile effort.
I'm sure staff's been thinking about that.
Flush less. That'll help.
Hashtag. And then you know this is on Facebook Live.
All right. Got to focus, folks.
The first time I've
Rock me, your turn.
something Jeff said. So my Dylan quote earlier was not by accident. Last year, Kevin Hannock approached John Kenyon of the City Literature, and he said, I have an idea. Let's do a Bob Dylan tribute featuring local artists at the Englert, and let's donate all of the money to the City of Literature. And John said, that sounds like a terrific idea. Last year, they raised about $5,000. It was so successful, they're doing it again. So get your pencils out and write down this date. It is going to take place. It's called Wheels on Fire, May 11th at 7 o'clock. There's general admission of $25, $15 for students, but for youth age 17 and under, they are free with a ticket purchase, presumably by adults. So it's going to be a great event. City of Literature, awesome local artists, great event, make some money. Doesn't get better than that. And Bob Dylan, May 11th at 7 o'clock at the Englert Theater. And that's it.
Thanks. Maz?
I don't have any. We're going to meet on the May 22nd, I guess, every 3 months. That's why no more update. Yeah. Kinsley?
Kingsley?
I mentioned the ECI-COG meeting that was last week in Cedar Rapids, and the meeting primarily focused on the current actions and future plans on efforts to cut the congestion on major roadways, particularly I-380. Those of you on Facebook, they're trying a variety of marketing efforts for the Ride Shares program. You may have seen the colorful ad, Cut I-380 Congestion logo. It's pink and purple. It's very pretty. The TV ads and billboards. They're still referring to it as corridor rides. they have potential for up to 26 van pools. They only have 4 currently, and they'd like to have 4 to 5 people in each of them. And it's all the 7-county area served by ECIOG, because they mentioned that currently now have a new one that runs from Davenport to West Branch. So we all think about Cedar Rapids and Iowa City, but this one was Davenport to West Branch to again, cut congestion. And they are talking about the plans for bus service. They're going to do a RFP either last week or this week, with hopes to start by this fall with an express bus service. So this is good progress for that, I think.
Yeah, good deal. Okay. So the CVB board met on April the 19th, and their discussion focused mainly on RAGBRAI, Run Crandic, Fry Fest, the Iowa Arena and Fieldhouse, and the relationship between the Chamber, ICAD, and the new entity ICR, the Regional Economic Development Entity. So with regard to Run Crandic, I gather that was a big success over the weekend. I wasn't out there running. I don't know, maybe there's some of our staff were.
26 miles.
I don't
Press
know.
coverage
Did
looks
Julie run?
good.
I don't know. Yeah, so it seems to have been a pretty big success.
Video. Oh, sorry, I was.
All right. So, and the Partnership for Alcohol Safety is going to meet next week on May the 8th. We'll report about that when it happens. Simon will report too. Okay, Gustav?
Yeah, I just wanted to give a shout out to the Bicycle Advisory Committee that they first had their first standing meeting just a few days ago, and that's going to lead to a lot of great success with the biking throughout the next coming years. Yeah.
Okay, good deal.
Related to that, right before you break up, the annual bus, bike, and car race between U Heights, Coralville, North Liberty, Johnson County, Iowa City. I think you're all familiar with that. They're looking for an Iowa City Council representative to ride the bus. So this is a race that takes place between elected officials who ride buses, drive, ride a bike. Jim, I think you've done it before.
I've done it several times, but Mike Haverkamp from University Heights cheated 2 or 3 years ago. He brought his bike along with him, and so he rode the bus, and then when the bus got downtown, he hopped on his bike and beat me by like 3 seconds.
Not that you're bitter about it. But on Monday, May 14th, you'd have to be at the Coralville Library at 11:15, and the bus leaves the Coralville Library at 11:37. So
It's fun to do. I hope one of you volunteer. I'm not going to this time.
it is Monday, May 14th.
I might do that.
Pauline?
Just ride the bus, not ride the bike. Okay.
All you have to do is ride the bus.
I'll do the bus.
I'll email you.
You draw straws when you get there.
I'll email you with the details.
Okay,
Pauline.
thanks.
Okay, good deal. I think that's probably it. So we'll reconvene in 17 minutes for a formal meeting.